Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the opinion show, that is, to male chauvinism, the white patriarchy and toxic masculinity. What the prosecution of Donald Trump for defamation is to the future well-being of women and girls around the world. Finally, the sisterhood will make sure that plenty of good will come out of the $83 million Trump must now pay for having dared to call his accuser, Carroll, a liar.
You've talked about using some of Trump's money that you're about to get to help shore up women's rights. Do you know what that might be, what that might look like?
Yes, Rachel. Yes.
Tell me.
I had such great ideas for all the good I'm going to do with this money.
Well, this is exciting indeed. Will the money be going to a women's refuge, perhaps a shelter for female victims of domestic violence, or, I don't know, perhaps to a maternity clinic?
First thing, Rachel, you and I are going to go shopping. We're going to get completely new wardrobes, new shoes, motorcycle for Crowley, new fishing rod for Robbie. Rachel, what do you want? Penthouse? It's yours, Nothing. Rachel.
A new fishing rod? Well, no doubt we'll get to the women's shelter in a moment, or will we?
Penthouse and France? You want France? You want to go fishing in France? No? Oh. All right, okay.
That's a joke.
All right, okay.
That's a joke.
Yes, that's a joke, or is it? Yes, believe all women, they say, so I guess we should believe all those women. And note how seriously and sensitively women of the left take women's claims of suffering sexual assault. Surely it wasn't all just fabricated to get Donald Trump. No, of course not. Now, while the woke sisterhood go fishing in France, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. Rita and James, that woman is as bonkers as a box full of whatevers. Will I get sued for defamation? I don't know.
Are you running for president?
I don't have $83 million.
Are you running? Are they going to retrospectively change laws so this absurd action could be taken? So no conviction for assault, rape, anything. But because Donald Trump said she was a bit of a fruitcake, she sued for defamation once some laws were changed, James, in New York. And surprisingly, a very Democrat heartland jury awarded her $83 million.
Well, here's the crazy thing, Rita. I'm be talking a little bit more about the crazy legal system in New York a bit later on in the program, but it is completely a two-tier standard of justice here. Remember, they essentially passed a 2022 law, the Victim Support Act.
Yes.
It was entirely written and designed with one target in mind: Donald Trump. And the whole point of this case, and so many of the other cases against him, is to get this guy tied up in the courts so that he can't run or can't take the oath of office for the presidency. So all of these things are falling apart, by the way. Like another one of the cases about election interference and so on, that's falling apart. Yep. All of these cases, all of these attempts to try and get him not to run, not to get people to vote for him, all of these things, they're now falling apart because the legal system is showing that actually it can't withstand the bonkers sorts of cases that these people are bringing.
It's banana republic abuse type stuff. But this one particular one with E. Carroll, that's going to fall apart. It's not going to stand up to appeal for many reasons.
She won't see a cent of that.
There's many reasons why you could destroy it on appeal, but here's just one of them. Listen to this same woman, E. Carroll, talking about rape earlier on to another TV host. Have a listen.
You don't feel like a victim?
I was not thrown on the ground and ravished. Which the word rape carries so many sexual connotations. This was not sexual. It hurt.
Well, I think most people think of rape as it is a violent assault. It is not.
I think most people think of rape as being sexy.
Let's take a short break.
Think of the fantasies.
We're just going to take a quick break. If you can stick around, we'll talk more on the other side.
You're fascinating to talk to.
Let's take a short break.
Get her off.
Get her off there screaming in his ear.
Did you just say rape is sex? Most people think rape is sex.
No.
So I think that's gone on appeal.
But
we
you know
don't have to worry about that one.
There was so much evidence that was not permitted to be introduced during this sham trial.
Didn't even know what year she was supposedly raped.
I don't think she... I mean, I think there's a very good chance she never actually wasn't even in the same room or in the same postcode as this man. The whole thing is such a sham. But, James, it's working because it is corrupting the process. It is tying up Trump in these legal battles where he should be focusing on campaigning. But in a perverse way also, as far as they're concerned, it's ensured his candidacy. Because remember, before this craziness started, Trump and DeSantis were neck and neck. It was over 2 points between them. And as soon as people saw this nakedly corrupt pursuit of Trump, then Trump's numbers soared.
Well, of course it did. I mean, because we've seen this through every single one of these things. This is real banana republic territory we're in. Essentially, you've had, you know, the government, the regime, let's call it, trying to jail the de facto opposition leader. And, I mean, that's just simply not American. No matter whether or not you like Trump or don't like Trump or like his style or don't like his style or like what he did or don't like what he did, the fact is trying to jail somebody for their politics and put all of the organs of state and the Justice Department to grind somebody up like this is profoundly un-American. People are waking up to the fact that this happens to a lot of people who are smaller than Donald Trump all the time, but that they don't wind up, you know, with the resources to be able to fight back. Of course, the thing that I've always said to the Democrats, but the Democrats don't listen to me because why would they, is if they wanted to beat Trump, they should treat him as the most absolutely normal candidate in the world, because all of their hatred winds up giving him energy. And people say, we want nothing to do with you people because you are so absolutely nuts on the subject. Why don't you want this guy in? Because what he's talking about is actually sane stuff. I mean, you know, America first, make America great, American jobs, protecting the country. Gee, and you find these things offensive, Democrats?
Not just offensive, they find it extremist. And Rowan, I think they're going to find out what comes after Trump is going to be very different indeed. Trump is a moderate. Trump, you look at the actual substance of what he says and what he wants to do. If they're scared of Trump, then get ready, because what comes after Trump, because half the country has had enough. This is the point, and this is why it's so critical that Trump does win, because if Trump doesn't win, we're going to see more of this abuse of the judicial system. We're going to see this endless, Democrat system of corruption, which has just perverted the electoral system. It's perverted the legal system. It's perverted education in America. It's done so much damage. This is why we need to see Trump in the White House, and it will have ripple effects around the world, I have no doubt. James, just quickly, let's talk about the attacks. Biden finally, after 5 days of going, okay, we're going to attack over here to show American resolve. They finally dropped some bombs last night.
Well, they dropped some bombs, but I think the whole thing was a bit of a bomb. Look, you know, Iran absolutely needs to be responded to and dealt with in the way that they're funding all of these proxy groups in the Red Sea and elsewhere to cause mayhem, interrupt shipping, and now killed 3 U.S. servicemen with one of these unarmed drones. The way the Biden administration is doing it is completely wrong, not surprisingly. They waited almost a week before firing anything back in terms of retaliation. They telegraphed their list of targets before they did it. They allowed all the IRGC commanders to get out, allowed them to get out whatever important stuff they wanted to get out before the missiles started to fly. Why? Because the Biden administration still is in bed with Iran. And this is a continuation of what happened during the Obama administration. They decided that what they wanted to do was legitimize Iran, use Iran to balance the Sunni Muslim players and Israel in the Middle East, empower them, give them money, release sanctions, release bank accounts to them that had been held in trust since the revolution. All of that money then, by the way, goes, and what's due? It funds Hezbollah. It funds Hamas. It funds the October 7th attacks. It funds the drones that killed 3 U.S. servicemen. And it is fueling and funding the attacks by Houthis in Yemen on shipping and causing all sorts of disruption to the global economy. These guys need to be stopped.
Well, this is what weakness gets you. Elections have consequences, and not just for America. Iran was isolated. It was demoralised under Trump. Now it has been emboldened. It knows Biden is desperate to complete this nuclear deal. It is well advanced with its strategy in that area. And this is a regime that cannot be trusted. You only have to look at how the Iranian regime treats its own people and the lies it tells to not trust anything it tells you in negotiating a nuclear deal, in negotiating anything. So they are just seizing on the weakness of the Biden administration and getting away with murder.
Well, again, this is why we need Trump back in the White House, because this madness with this current progressive madness where you tell people where you're going to drop your bombs or attack in advance, which kind of defeats the purpose of the attack. Imagine Ronald Reagan. He responded immediately, decisively, and with surprise, the element of surprise, so that the enemy, and Iran is the enemy, never knows where you're going to hit them if they dare pop up again. We've completely got our approach to, the West approach to Iran completely wrong. The head of the snake is Iran. It needs to be cut off, and that's the end to it. It needs to be finished.
I mean, the big issue, though, is that these guys treat the Iranian mullahocracy as a legitimate regime. And this is the thing. Most Iranian people do not support the mullahs. 100%. Poll after poll shows this. We saw democracy protests under Obama. They refused to help out. We saw democracy protests under Biden. They refused to give them any sort of support. The idea that we just sort of keep allowing them to crack down on their people like this. And also, at the same time, they also need to take a page out of Reagan's playbook. There's far too many American servicemen who are in harm's way, where they're just sitting ducks for targets, just like, the bombing of the Marine barracks in Lebanon in 1981. Get your people out of the way. You can handle this without being right there on the ground.
Trump took out Soleimani, who was one of the leading Iranian terrorists. Bang, got rid of him. Didn't tell him what. He didn't phone up in advance. Hey, Soleimani, you know what? We're going to come after you next week, so why don't you move? I mean, seriously, the Biden administration is a joke. But just quickly, Rita, also talk about London last night. And we've got some footage we will show you in a tick. But in London, you had these disgraceful demonstrations, basically pro-Iran, pro-extremist Islamic ideology, flags waving. There you go, the kind of ISIS-style flags. It was all pro-Palestinian, marching, praying, whole streets taken over with blokes praying around the cenotaph.
They were calling on Yemen to stop more ships. I don't think we've got a grab here. And let's just have a listen to what they're chanting. Yeah, Yemen turn the ships around. I mean, they're literally chanting for the enemies
of the state.
And they had posters up, James, saying by any means possible, free.
Exactly.
Again, when you say by any means possible, that includes what we saw on October 7, the rape, slaughter, torture of innocent people. This is in London, James.
And what's Rishi Sunak doing? Where is Rishi Sunak and why are they allowing this to happen?
I just think, though, I'm glad that Rita mentioned chants, because I think that brings us to an important story. Because I know that you heard turn those ships
New South Wales
around.
government.
But according to the New South Wales police, they were saying, turn your hips around. I think it was a dance move that they were doing.
So let's talk about the Opera House. So this week, the New South Wales police, what was the guy's name again? Lanyon. I'm a bit hard of hearing when it comes to the New South Wales Police Force. Let's have a listen. Fortunately, they have an acoustics expert. Hallelujah. All of us who've been in the media for many, many years, no, we're not acoustics expert. You need a proper acoustics expert. Let's have a listen to this bloke telling us what.
As a result of that investigation, investigators have received significant volumes of audio and video files recorded outside the Opera House on that night. As part of the investigation, investigators engaged an eminent expert in biometric science. That expert has conducted an audio, visual and acoustic phonetic analysis of the audio-visual files. As a result of that examination, the expert has concluded with overwhelming certainty that the phrase chanted during that protest, as recorded on the audio and visual files, was "Where's the Jews?" not another phrase as otherwise widely reported.
Who is this idiot? I mean, seriously, this idiot has embarrassed all of New South Wales. I'm sorry, your audio file expert, doodah, biometric, what's it? wasn't there. We will have someone on the show shortly who was there at one of the protests outside the town hall who heard people saying, gas the Jews. I've seen stat decks of people saying they heard gas the Jews. There are any number of people who were interviewed by the New South Wales police. There was one person called Philippa who spent 3 hours with the New South Wales police.
3 hours?
And told them very categorically that gas the Jews was being said. Now, the first thing to say about this is that it's completely irrelevant anyway, because this was an anti-Semitic rally at an event, the Opera House, one of the most important sites in Australia in terms of the world's opinion of us. It was a memorial to those people murdered and massacred on October 7th. It was 24 hours later. Israel hadn't started to respond. There was nothing in Gaza happening on. It was a memorial to all the people who've been raped, butchered, murdered, kidnapped, desecrated, decapitated. And Australia put on a memorial, and these absolute thugs turned up, marching outside the Opera House. They're letting off flares and going on and yelling about Jews. I don't care if they were yelling F the Jews or do kill the Jews or gas the Jews or do whatever to the Jews or where's the Jews. Why would they be asking where's the Jews? Because they want to do harm to them. And that is what it was all about, a modern pogrom, a modern lynch mob, and this moron of a police character gets up there and bangs on about an audiophile expert. Shame on you. What an absolute disgrace.
Well,
Australia should hang its head in shame, and New South Wales, that bloke should be punted tomorrow, whatever his name is. Oh, punted? I said punted. No, not the other word. Yeah, just punted.
But Rowan, remember, the question where's the Jews is actually really important.
It's almost worse than gas the Jews.
But you know why
it's a
you know why it's
pogrom.
worse? You know why it's worse, Rowan? Because the New South Wales police that night told the Jews, go home. You're not
Exactly.
safe here.
Yes.
We cannot guarantee
We
your
will not
safety.
protect you.
We will not protect you. And if you come with an Israeli flag, we will bundle you off and have you arrested. This is what actually happened. This was the real shame of this. Everybody needs to remember this rally was a celebration of a massacre. Israel was still counting the dead. They were still trying to understand the horror of what had taken place on October 7th. They hadn't, begun to contemplate what they were going to do in retaliation or how they were going to eliminate Hamas or what they were going to do about Gaza. They were still picking up the pieces. And these guys out here were chanting and celebrating and lighting off flares just like that preacher out in, I think it was Bankstown. Greenacre, who was yelling about this is a day of celebration, just like we saw people all over social media.
They're celebrating.
This was all about celebrating the murder, massacre, and rape of Jewish people. And for the police to then say, oh, well, now we're going to make it about this. That's ridiculous. What's even more ridiculous, though, is all the people on the left who are saying, hey, see, it's okay. They didn't say gas the Jews. They just said, where's the Jews and F the Jews. But they didn't say the other thing. So really, what's your problem?
Rita?
New South Wales Police has taken 4 months to try to cover their own butt, basically.
That's what they're doing. This is a cover-up.
What this is.
This is a cover-up.
This is a PR exercise. It's a shameful PR exercise. It's one that any sensible person can see right through. We've got the audio. We've heard what we've heard.
You can hear it, folks. Use your own
people with
ears.
the stat decks. And as you said, this was even before the counter-offensive. So this is before Israel had responded. So at this stage, all that happened was that we've had the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The sails of the Opera House were to be lit up in the colours of the Israeli flag as a show of support. And Jews weren't allowed to be there to have that sombre moment, to have that moment of grief, because police told them you're not safe. So that's the climate in which this happened. Let's not forget that.
And Australia, many Jews in Australia understandably now feel terrified. This is their homeland, their parents' homeland. Many of them, their parents escaped from the Holocaust, traumatised by that event. We now have the police, the New South Wales Commissioner here in New South Wales making, whatever he is, assistant, making a complete goose of himself. We'll play you a bit of the chant. You can decide for yourself what you hear, but here you go. This was the shameful experience on the Opera House, a modern-day version of a pogrom or a lynch mob preparing itself on the steps of the Opera House. Disgusting stuff. Have a listen. Disgraceful stuff, James.
Well, and, you know, let's also remember that so much of this also goes down to the utterly useless police minister in New South Wales, Yasmin
100%.
Catley, who did nothing about this, who gave the worst sort of mealy-mouthed interviews when she was asked about why was this allowed to happen, why were Jewish people not allowed to be present, why weren't arrests made on the night of people who were doing things that were obviously illegal, like setting off flares on the forecourt of the Opera House. And it was all, oh, well, it was about safety. And it was actually the safety of her officers. They didn't want confrontation, which means that if you're
the officers are scared.
If you're enough of a thug, you get to decide who controls the streets.
100%.
That was disgraceful. But, you know, beyond that too, it wasn't just this. For weeks afterwards, Rita, you saw this in Melbourne too. You had caravans of people, Middle Easterners, coming through Jewish neighborhoods with their cars, with huge PLO flags, chanting, screaming, intimidating people in the eastern beaches here in Melbourne as well. And, you know, all of this was about intimidating Jews in what is supposed to be a country that is welcoming to all faiths, especially Jews who came here, so many of them, after the war.
Well, we've talked about a two-tier justice system in America, but we've got two-tier policing right here in Australia, and we've seen it over and over again. It is not limited to this. We saw it with the BLM marches. We saw it with how they treated anti-lockdown protesters. They weren't scared of conflict then. They were very happy to have conflict then. In fact, they adopted tactics that almost guaranteed conflict by bottling people in and not allowing them to disperse peacefully. And we saw, whilst they were allowed to do as they liked, a lone man with an Israeli flag
had him on the show,
was
Mike
arrested for having an for his own protection, he was told. We've had him on here talking about it.
Just a quick news break here. We actually have just heard the New South Wales Police have confirmed that JF Kennedy did say, ask not what your cabbage can do for you, but what you can do for your cabbage. And New South Wales Police have confirmed that Glenn Campbell said, by the time I get to Kleenex, she'll be crying, James.
Well, and also there's just, hang on, sorry. There's just one more. We've got apparently Martin Luther King's speech in Washington. Apparently Martin Luther King had an ice cream, people. So that's live from New South Wales Police. Thank you very much for the update.
And Rita, New South Wales Police have confirmed that Neil Armstrong did say, one small Stepford man, one giant leopard. Four of a kind.
Well, they have made themselves into a joke, and I'm seeing already memes on X, formerly Twitter, with the footage of crimes, and they're going, oh, no, New South Wales knife expert has looked at this and concluded that, you know, this stabbing was actually just a terrible accident. Someone fell on a fork. You know, so they have made themselves the object of ridicule. And it's completely self-inflicted. They could have just said, we stuffed up, we should have done better that night, we should have protected the Jewish community, we shouldn't have told them not to go to the Opera House, we should have been there in numbers to make sure they were safe, and we should have arrested anybody who was breaking the law, making threats. But no, they took 4 months to come up with this song and dance show.
And the insidious part of this is, of course, they've said, oh, we can't arrest anyone because those people who claim they heard gas the Jews couldn't actually identify who it was in the crowd who'd yelled it out.
Is that our job now? Is that our job to identify?
So hang on. So you're there in the crowd. There's an angry lynch mob there yelling out whatever, and you're supposed to go, hang on, excuse me, come over here. Did you say F the Jews or
Can I grab your
Jew?
driver's licence and home address,
I mean,
please?
seriously.
They did not need to hear anybody say anything to make arrests, all right? They were setting off flares. That is illegal. And the cops just stood by. It would have been so demoralizing to be a frontline officer and have the top brass and the Min's government say, no, don't arrest these clowns because we need to let them blow off some steam.
Absolutely. I'll be speaking later in the show about Penny Wong and why I believe she must resign after her UNRWA funding. But let's, Rita, quickly, Baker's Delight. This is a disturbing story. Baker's Delight, great bakers. We all know them. We love all their products. But some people have, because they came out in favour, basically, regarding The Voice, some left-leaning Aussies have turned against them because of their stance on The Voice, Rita.
Well, I think there's one response to that, and that's for the overwhelming majority of Australians who voted against The Voice, voted against enshrining racial privilege and racial division into our Constitution. Go to
Baker's Delight. It's a Sunday morning. Get down to Baker's Delight. Pack up your bag, all the great goodies they've got there. Have a real feast of it. Get down to your Baker's Delight and show your support.
I do reckon, though, that most of the people who are like, oh, no, Baker's Delight, they supported the no case. I suspect there's the sort of people who are at home nursing their sourdoughs, so I'm not really sure they're getting cheese and bacon stroll for breakfast.
Like that woman who was on the ABC who said, white bread is for white males. Remember that? Remember that white bread?
Scott Orson, yeah.
OK, we'll take a short break. Lots more coming up. We've got lots of exciting people to talk to. Don't go away. Back in a tick with Rita's Reality Check.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi from The Rita Panahi Show, Friday nights, 7 p.m, where every week we bring you a compilation of lefties losing it. Now, often these lefties are green-haired freaks supergluing themselves to roads or confused men in dresses having tantrums in restaurants. But sometimes the lefties losing it are the creators and producers of one of the longest-running TV programs, Law and Order SVU, who recently ran an episode where a white rape victim did not want to prosecute her black rapist because of her inherent privilege.
But Natalie, Jay Watson raped you. You think I forgot? How could I? This entire trial has been an exercise in reminding me.
And this is your chance to do something about it.
I am going to. Believe me. Because I can. I can afford therapy. I have that luxury. And maybe one day I'll be okay. But if that teenager goes to prison, he may not be. Ever.
Yeah, that's a great message to send to women, that even if they are the victims of the most heinous crime, they should consider their own race and socioeconomic status and that of their attacker before seeking justice. That they should prioritise being good little victims and allies rather than holding a rapist accountable. In the program that aired last week in the US, even the rape victim's lesbian partner was afflicted with white guilt, agonising about the systematic racism that the justice system is perpetuating, and seemingly more angry at the cops than the young man who raped her partner.
Not great. I was up all night with Natalie. She was inconsolable.
That's understandable. Look, when a person goes through a trauma like that, they can end up in a very vulnerable state.
Yeah, it wasn't about that.
Okay, then what?
We're acutely aware of the systemic inequities that exist within the criminal justice system.
You mean for people like Jay?
Yeah. Our concern is that he might not receive a fair trial.
Well, I can't deny that there's a history of racial bias. It's certainly not a perfect system.
How do you do this every day?
What? Yes, the cops in the program just reaffirmed the tripe about institutional racism, and it got worse. The rape victim is eventually encouraged to name her attacker, but of course, the young black man has to be painted in a sympathetic light. This is a rapist, mind you. The prosecutor, despite having a slam-dunk case and a guaranteed guilty verdict, decides to agree to a favourable plea deal for the rapist, who, after all, is just another victim of racism in America.
It was just supposed to be a robbery. But when I saw her, my whole life, nobody paid attention to anything I did. Not at home, not at school. Always felt kind of invisible, you know? So why would this be any different? I guess I finally learned my lesson. Just too late.
It's never too late, Mr. Watson. You'll do time. Not your whole life. When you get out, you'll still have some runway ahead of you.
Oh, thank God for that. We wouldn't want the rapist's life to be ruined now. This is the poisonous, racist, victim-blaming narrative being promoted by a major long-running TV series. Have they just run out of story ideas, or are they trying to shame girls and women who want to take action against an attacker if that attacker happens to be black? Are they shifting the goalposts again, where to be seen as a good white ally, you should consider the ethnicity of your rapist before calling the cops? It's ugly, it's dangerous, and based on utter falsehoods about systematic racism. Just another example of the entertainment industry being hopelessly broken with race obsessions and woke dogma.
Fantastic, Rita. Thank you. More than 2 years after the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we all remember those days, the devastating effects of the lockdowns, which this show railed against at the time, and vaccine mandates, which only this show railed against at the time, are still being felt across the nation. The hurt and disarray caused by the imposition of such draconian, authoritarian dictates is, as I said at the time, and I've said many, many times since, absolutely demands a royal commission into the abuse of power during COVID. That process may have started this week in the Australian Federal Parliament, where many doctors, several doctors, got up, and medical professionals, and fronted a Senate committee there calling on the government to do just that, to hold a royal commission into COVID. Joining us are two of the health professionals who addressed that Senate inquiry this week. Ella Leach, who is the Secretary of the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland, and Dr. Julie Sladden, who's a medical practitioner with over 25 years of experience and co-director of Australians for Science and Freedom, and I'm delighted to say a regular columnist on The Spectator Australia. Thank you both, Ella and Julie, for joining us. Julie, let's kick off with you. Why do you think we need a royal commission into COVID?
Thanks, Ron, for having me here today. Look, as I stated in my Senate speech, there has been a catastrophic failure of medical ethics, human rights and free speech in this country. And with that, just a devastating effect on the trust, both in the health professions, in the government, and so many systemic responses that we saw. I think the only way we can begin to restore that trust is through a royal commission. Of course, there are a lot of other things that need to happen because we're still living through the fallout of what happened during the pandemic. You know, there are still healthcare workers who can't work due to the mandates. There are injured people from the injections who can't get the help they need. But if we don't even start to unpick what's happened and why at multiple levels, there is no way that we can rebuild back to what we want Australia to be again.
Ella, tell us your personal story and what happened to you.
Yes, so I would be coming up to my 6-year anniversary with Queensland Children's Hospital, but about 2 years ago they decided to kick me out along with thousands of other nurses across Queensland. They thought it was appropriate to draw this out for 2 years, and even though the mandate dropped in Queensland in September last year, 2023, they continued to fire hundreds of other nurses, and I received my termination letter just after New Year while I'm on maternity leave.
Nice, James.
And so tell us, so what exactly are these, mandates that are still occurring? Because we know that throughout the pandemic, the narrative around the vaccines and their official statements went from, these prevent and they stop transmission and stop you getting sick, to, well, they can be a bit of a help, kind of. It's essentially sort of the avenue where they went. What basically are they arguing is that there's a necessity for this sort of thing anymore?
Ella?
It is so obviously not about public safety anymore. It is vindictive. But even they were firing nurses who were working from home. So I don't know how they can justify that on the basis of public safety. But I believe it's a matter of money now. They know that all of the members in our union will not be paying fees to the other union. And that's a huge hit to the Labor Party, I assume, as well. But I can't imagine why they think they can justify it. Now, they say that we're insubordinate and can't be trusted, but the nurses they've gotten rid of are the ones who were fearless. They advocated for themselves the way they advocate for their patients at work. They stood up for what they believed in.
Now, Julie, I want to ask you specifically about informed consent. You're a doctor with a long pedigree and history. Tell me what really disturbed you about COVID, why you believe we need this inquiry on the broader medical ethical issues. And that's what I think is absolutely crucial that people understand. Explain it to us.
Thanks, Ron. Look, I do think there is a fundamental issue here in that of informed consent. And when they first announced that the mandates would be happening, I really thought to myself, well, how are they going to do that? Because informed consent, legally valid informed consent, and you can read this in the Australian Immunisation Handbook, can only exist in the absence of undue pressure, coercion and manipulation. Now, I argue that the entire Australian population was coerced, manipulated and subject to undue pressure when you can't move freely between states, you can't go and visit loved ones. Oh, you can't even earn a living in the profession that you've trained for all your life without subjecting yourself to an experimental injection, which had a paucity of safety data. We all know that. Hadn't even been tested for transmission, and anyone under the age of 70 had a minuscule risk of suffering seriously from the virus. And that was well known in mid to late 2020. So informed consent can only happen when the risks of the treatment or procedure has been discussed with someone. The doctors did not know of the risks because A, they were unknown, or B, they were not informed of some of these risks, and a whole nother Royal Commission could be given to that. But one of the most troubling things in amongst all that was that the administration exerted itself in that sacred space between the doctor and a patient by effectively silencing doctors. And I use that word cautiously but firmly because they sent out a position statement which said that any healthcare practitioner that spoke out against the vaccine rollout risked disciplinary action. And the way this manifested was that doctors were too scared to issue exemption certificates. They were too scared to submit reports of adverse reactions. They were too scared to advocate for their patients, and they were too scared to provide the healthcare that the Australian population needed. And there has been a huge breach of trust there. This is a safety issue. This is a huge safety issue now.
And Dr. Slatton, that has undermined trust in the medical profession in the eyes of many patients. That in itself is a massive issue. But what is the Albanese government saying in defence of not having a Royal Commission? They had a Royal Commission into robo-debt, and their COVID response impacted every single Australian. It adversely impacted millions of Australians. So what reason are they giving for declining to offer a Royal Commission? Are they just scared of some of those Labor premiers being compelled to give evidence?
Now that I would like to see. Julie.
Oh, look, I've read some of the reasons for it. And to be honest, they don't really wash that well with me. When you look at the responses that Australia made, by far the most devastating ones that we're suffering the hangover from now are the ones that were taken by individual states, locking up healthy people for weeks on end with no recourse. The mandates were done by the states, by the state health departments. So whatever reasons that have been given, they certainly will not even begin to unpick, and there won't be any teeth behind any of the evidence or the decisions that have been made. And as for the team that they've selected, well, let's just leave that there.
So, Ella, are you bitter about the way you've been treated? I mean, you went into the health profession, to help people, paediatrics specialty. That's one of the greatest things that people can devote their life to. You've been trampled on simply for standing up to your own rights, as Julie has said, your free democratic rights of informed consent, and yet you've been trashed. How does that make you feel, Ella?
Bitter is not quite the right word. I mean, I am one of the lucky ones. I've had backup options and a supportive family. There are nurses I speak to who are living in their cars, or single mums of 4 kids who couldn't feed their family. So I am devastated for them. But we know that we're heading towards a retirement cliff. ARPRA, which is the registration board for Australia, their own data shows that we're expecting 6,000 nurses to retire in Queensland this year. They've known this since 2019. So it's more, who's in charge of this operation? Why is our state government not coming out and reinstating these very much needed staff? And even our opposition leader, Dave Crisafulli, and our Shadow Health Minister, Ros Bates, are not coming out saying that this should not be happening. We've got an election this year. How can we even think that anything will change in October if there's a change of government? This is why we need a royal commission to make sure that this stops happening, because the response is current. It's not a thing of the past. There are still people locked out. It affects the people who are mandated. It affects the people who are still working, and Australians accessing our system. I had a nurse contact me saying that on her ward, one of the nurses she works with was given a patient but didn't realise this patient was in her patient load for an entire shift because of staffing issues. So this patient got no care for a whole day because of this. It's dangerous. It's not a personal thing. It doesn't matter what I feel. It's bigger than me. It's a absolute disaster.
Well, you can contact Ella Leach or Julie Sladden. Julie, just tell us quickly where people can get in touch with you.
Best place to find me is at Australians for Science and Freedom, and it's just julie@scienceandfreedom.org. Take a look at our website. There's a lot of academics and intellectuals there who have joined together to speak out against many of the things that we saw happen during the COVID.
And Ella, where can people contact you?
If you just navigate to the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland page, you can access me through the hotline there. We've got surveys showing people who want to return to work. So if you are listening and you are mandated out of work, please contact us. The ANMF are saying that there's hundreds missing, not thousands, and we need to show that that is completely untrue.
There you go. Ella Leach and Julie Sladden, 2 very brave women who spoke with other doctors and nurses as well this week, demanding a royal commission into the abuse of power and a royal commission into COVID. We must have that. Shame on all those politicians and medical bureaucrats. We know who you are. You are a disgrace, hiding behind the absolutely appalling situation you inflicted on Australia for 2 years. You will be caught one day, don't worry. I'm not going to stop until you are. Coming up for a break now, and then we'll be back with Net Zany, the crazy world of climate change. Yes, it's Net Zany, the crazy, wacky world of climate change policies. Well, the ABC have informed us kindly that pregnancies are now subject to climate change. Apparently, climate change is linked to pregnancy complications, and Australians are particularly vulnerable. Oh, no. There we go. Thank you, ABC, for scaring pregnant women witless as you do. Endlessly disgraced.
Of course, if you care about the climate, you wouldn't be having any children anyway. So
that's right.
Great point,
yes.
Rita. Great point.
Good point. Now, James,
yes.
Mona Lisa protesters, they got a bit of instant karma.
Well, yeah, look at this here. We've got another one of these sorts of soup-throwing incidents here. I am very, very suspicious about these incidents here, because where are the guards who should be, frankly, pummeling them? Where, by the way, for that matter, are the patrons who should be pummeling them?
Yeah.
Shame on the French.
Shame on the French, who normally, take a fairly kinetic response to protesters.
There will be tourists in there, so maybe
well, they're all tourists, but whatever. But nevertheless, I feel like these sorts of things are really set up here, with possibly collusion from people within the museum to let these sorts of things happen for the publicity.
Well, yeah, if you're walking in and you're armed with, this time, cans of soup, but often it's cans of paint, or they've got hammers or all sorts of other... How are they not being stopped? They've got...
But the best bit, Rita, is, as James pointed out, the glass that protects the Mona Lisa and all these paintings is made by Charles Koch's company, he's one of the great one of the great fossil fuel billionaires.
Oh, and
protecting all these.
One of the hate figures of the leftover Koch Industries with, the Kochtopus that was supposedly controlling the entire world.
Protecting
so, yes, that is pretty funny.
But Rita...
but at the LA Times,
yes.
the great Los Angeles Times has got this take. You might think those people are crazy, but they've got this headline: how throwing soup at the Mona Lisa can help fight climate change. James, the LA Times has just recently laid off a bunch of people. Obviously not enough.
Well, it's funny because it's like you think about, all of these things that they're doing to fight climate change. Like throwing soup in. I mean, clearly it's working because, like we've had this really, really cool summer when we were supposed to have El Nino.
Well, let's talk about that. No hot days in Melbourne for 40 years, said this report in The Guardian.
What?
That young journo will have been punted by now. How dare they put that? Melbourne weathers its first January without a hot day since 1984.
Hot being above 35
But as
degrees.
Rita pointed out yesterday, the Sydney, the Bureau of Meteorology, or whoever puts together the iPhone things, had Sydney 27 degrees, mostly sunny.
Look
Extreme
at the warning.
Heat warning. Extreme.
That's my phone, Rowan. That was on my phone. I wouldn't have believed it otherwise because I'm looking at my phone, checking to see what the weather in Sydney is. It's mid-20s in summer in Australia. And that's apparently extreme heat. That's cause for alarm.
It's utterly ridiculous.
What is going on? And it does have Australian Government Bureau of Meteorology Metropolitan. So that's where that extreme
Remember,
heat
this is the
warning
same
comes
Bureau
from.
of Meteorology that screwed up the call on El Nino, decided that they were going to pump out this whole message that we're going to have this hot, dry, horrible, drought, bushfire-prone summer. Didn't eventuate. It's been wet. It's been cooler than normal. Again, and yet these things have consequences, not just, for your golf game or whatever. Farmers across the country, they sold off their stocks. They said, we don't want to try and get so they crashed the price of lamb, crashed the price of beef. Everybody lost a ton of money because of that. And now there's going to be a huge spike, I think, in the cost of beef and lamb, again, because the BOM made the bad call.
And if they can't predict what's going to happen next week or even next month, how are they, with any confidence, predicting what's going to happen in 30, 40, 50 years'
They can tell you
time?
1.5 degrees. I mean, it's such nonsense. I loved it during the tennis. Unintentionally or otherwise, Jim Courier made a comment about why is it so cold in Melbourne these days? It used to be so much hotter for the Australian Open.
And he's a ginger. He would know.
Exactly.
They feel the heat.
But it's not just Australia. Sweden had its coldest temperature since 1999. Sweden last week recorded its coldest January night in 25 years. Sweden, of course, being the home of Greta Thunberg, the great climate activist. And we find out as well that the Arctic cold spell, there was an extraordinary cold spell in Antarctic during this summer. So there you go. Lots happening there.
Cold in the Antarctic?
No.
That's like it being hot in Australia.
By the way, it's just important to point out, too, on that, because you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be watching this, or going through it and going, oh, well, you see, it's the cold weather, that proves climate change. It's the hot weather, that proves climate change. And the fact that the weather's cooler than normal, that proves climate change. And they've developed this whole sort of thing. It's the non-falsifiability thesis.
Yes, exactly.
Which is really important to keep reminding everybody that when absolutely everything proves your thesis, even if it goes against what your thesis was last week, it ain't a theory. It's a cult.
It is religious zealotry. That's what it is. And there will be no heretics allowed. No matter what sound, sensible, evidence-based opposition you have, you're a heretic.
You'll be burned.
Denier.
You'll be burned at the electric stake.
Well, if you want to be a heretic, there is a reckless renewables rally in Canberra on Tuesday. This coming Tuesday. There you go. I think it's at 10 a.m. And that'll be against all the kind of renewables madness, which is seeing those transmission lines crisscrossing farmers' lands, destroying much of their property, making it impossible for farmers, by the way, or the Rural Fire Brigade to fight fires on properties if those transmission lines are there. The windmills off Port Stephens and the Hunter there, if you're against those, then be at the Reckless Renewables Rally, Canberra, on Tuesday. Greta Thunberg got let off, James. So apparently it's one rule for them, back to your Banana Republic theory. Greta Thunberg got nothing wrong. She was the the judge decided that she couldn't read her instructions to not attend the rally. Or
Well,
something
apparently
like that.
not. It's you know, because of course she's protected. Climate protests are, of course, always protected. You know, we see this over and over again with all sorts of things. It takes us back to what we were talking about, by the way, at the start of the show.
Exactly.
You know, some protests are allowed to be disruptive, others are shut down right away.
So the judge threw out the charges against Greta and 4 other climate protesters. Because it was too hard for her to understand the instructions not to go to the demonstration. Rita, India, coal-fired power plants to lift people out of poverty this year. India will start operating a whole bunch more new coal-fired power plants. Who'd have thought? There you go. Good for Australian coal. If you happen to be digging up and selling Australian coal, make sure you go to India because that's where you can buy it. Meanwhile, Chris Bowen drives our energy prices up and up and up. Absolute disgrace. Let's do a bit of wackademia. Wackademia.
Oh my God.
Timing is everything. It's like a well-oiled machine, just bang like that. They read my mind. Wackademia, Harvard donations, Rita.
Yes, this is a mega donor. He has donated hundreds of millions to Harvard over the years. And finally, I would say well overdue, Ken Griffin has said enough. The Joint's just producing these woke idiots. They're not elite any longer, and he doesn't want his money going. But how did it take him this long? Because the decline in Harvard hasn't just come about in the last 6 months. I know the way they reacted to October.
On for decades.
Decades. And they're patently racist with their admissions.
But we need to see this happening in Australia. You've got to start defunding these stupid universities that are churning out all these woke idiots. Seriously, if you happen to be, you have this image of your days at university and you think, oh, well, I loved university when I was there, and sending money to these universities. No, they are poisonous. They are dangerous. Most of them, not all of them, obviously. James?
Oh, yeah, well, look, I was just going to say...
Tampon dispensers.
Oh, yeah.
Rita and I wanted you to talk about the tampon dispenser.
Well, very quickly,
you being the man on the panel.
In the great state of Connecticut, a high school installed a tampon dispenser in the boys' bathroom, of course, as you do. This piece of equipment lasted a full 20 minutes before the wise young men of this school simply said, no, this is ridiculous, and ripped it off the wall. Now, the principal, of course, had an absolute meltdown over this. He said he was disgusted by this act because apparently it was, all sorts of phobic or whatever. But, I think the boys here had a bit more common sense than the principal.
The principal has got his pronouns listed.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, so perhaps there is one man who's got his period at that school, and that's the principal.
Well, speaking of pronouns, we are going to take a short break, and we will be back in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita. The penny just dropped. Panahi, James, a penny for your thoughts. Morrow, and myself, Penny Wong is in my ears and in my eyes. Dean. What? Let me clearly and concisely repeat for the hard of hearing, that'd be the New South Wales Deputy Police Commissioner, among others, what I said earlier this week and in my editorial in The Spectator, Australia. Every Australian taxpayer now has on their conscience the terrifying prospect that their hard-earned dollars went towards financing the rape, the mutilation, torture, kidnapping and murder of innocent Jewish girls, women, babies, boys and men on 7th of October in southern Israel. That is in particular, that's the legacy of the disgusting recklessness of Labor's Penny Wong, who increased our funding of that organisation after it had been reduced by previous governments. The entire world now knows the extent of UNRWA, that's United Nations Relief and Works Agency's, links to terror. I've been warning and talking about this for years, so I won't go through it all again. Yet, Foreign Minister Penny Wong ignored all the warnings and went ahead and increased the amount of hard-earned Australian tax dollars to an outfit that, according to one piece of legal advice that I have seen by an eminent Australian KC, fits the definition of fostering terrorism. It's an outrage. What risk assessment was undertaken before those funds were reinstated? The idea that my and your tax dollars may have contributed in any way to the ongoing horror show of Hamas's October 7th barbarity and hostage-taking is unacceptable. As an Australian taxpayer, I demand that Penny Wong resign. And as for the Gazan refugees being admitted into this country, that cannot be allowed to continue if there is even the slightest chance that a single one of those individuals has similar connections or affiliations with terrorism. I was pleased to see New South Wales Senator Dave Sharma, the former ambassador to Israel, this week basically agreeing with me that Wong had ample warning about Hamas. And he calls her amateurish and accurately criticises Albanese's astonishing lack of leadership. So let's be clear, this government, the Labor Albanese government, is a disgrace, in my opinion. And it's an opinion shared by increasing numbers of conservatives and other commentators, including those who were originally very generous in their praise and opinions of the Albanese team and Penny Wong. Take the Australian's Greg Sheridan, who in an excellent piece yesterday wrote of the increasingly dangerous world we live in, we now face, thanks to the threats of war posed by China, by Russia, by Iran, and all their numerous proxies. So, to quote Greg Sheridan, in all of this, the danger he's referring to, the Albanese government has been a model of indolence, ineptness, incompetence, and inattention. Far from building deterrence, as every US ally should be doing urgently, it's actually presiding over the catastrophic rundown of Australia's already minuscule military capabilities. We can't put all or even most of our old-age pensioner Anzac frigates to sea because we don't have crews to man them. So we couldn't help in the Red Sea, for instance. We can't move our troops around any battlefield because we don't have helicopters, having decided bizarrely to bury them all, showing there are no limits to the folly of Australian defence policy. We cannot confront any military force, no matter how ragtag, which has armed drones, because although we spend $50 billion a year on defence, we ourselves possess neither armed drones nor counter-drone capabilities. That was Greg Sheridan. I spoke last year about the three I's that define the Albanese government: ideology, idiocy, and incompetence. Greg has now added three more: indolence, ineptness, and inattention. And speaking of what is happening overseas, there's been hardly any mention in the mainstream media of the mayhem in European capital cities because of the revolutionary uprising of Europe's farmers, with protests spreading across France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Holland, Spain, and Ireland, to name only a few places. Allow me to quote from an excellent piece in The Spectator by Gavin Mortimer. Quote, "From the Mediterranean to Normandy, farmers of cattle, sheep, chickens, and crops are demonstrating outside French prefectures and dumping hay in fast food restaurants and there in front of the Eiffel Tower. On Monday, they used tractors and bales of hay to blockade motorways accessing Paris. Their resolve is unshakable. They will go to the bitter end, they say." Gavin goes on, European Union regulations are making farmers' lives a misery, although they also blame bureaucrats in Paris for applying the rules so zealously. That's EU regulations and red tape and green tape. "We can't even trim our hedgerows without permission," says one farmer, Patricia. Her land is scanned by drones. Yes, they're using drones to check up that her farm is complying with all the new environmental directives. Last year, this particular farmer was ordered to reduce her water usage by 30%. Being compliant has become a nightmare, she says, because of the administration. Shockingly, every 2 days in France, a farmer commits suicide. But what are these protests actually all about, I hear you say? Well, the article continues. All these incomprehensible measures are tied up in the EU's Green Deal, which was introduced in 2019 by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The aim is for the EU to be climate neutral by 2050. The Global Farmer Network, an alliance of farmers from around the world, summarised the Green Deal as the EU's plan to eliminate modern farming in Europe, devised by bureaucrats with no understanding of the agricultural industries. Quote, in the next decade, farmers are supposed to slash their use of crop protection products by half, cut application of fertiliser by 20%, transform a quarter of total farmland into organic production. So there you have it. The very same climate-obsessed net zero at all costs leftist political ideology that is driving Europe to the brink of revolution is the very same political ideology being pursued by Albanese and Chris Bowen and this Labor government. The only difference is Europe are a few years ahead of us. But make no mistake, this is where Australia is headed, and unless you, the farmers of Australia, take action now and get organised to vote this madness out and vote Bowen and Labor out of power, you can look forward to a future similar to that of Europe's farmers. You have been warned. Of course, the mainstream media only report all of this as far-right extremism and that sort of nonsense. The reality is very different. As in Australia, the farming community are amongst some of the most hard-working, generous, patriotic, caring, compassionate members of society, the salt of the earth, whose efforts we all rely on to eat. And guess what? Plenty of people know it. There's a great clip on Twitter where the cops at one of the protests in France, the cops themselves are busy handing out food and biscuits to the protesting farmers. They're on their side. Another clip, which is terrific, is where the police were chasing some particular farmer and the police get stuck in the mud in the farmer's field and the farmer comes along and helps them get out of the bog they've driven into. But the reality is, of course, that if the farmers are not farming and are instead blockading the cities, well, what's going to happen? Yes, the supermarket shelves are soon bare. That's what's happening all throughout Europe. And that is, of course, the inevitable outcome of climate-obsessed policies. Empty shelves. Again, Australia, you have been warned. And the irony? While European farmers are being forced off the land to tackle insane climate net zero policies like cutting down on carbon dioxide, well, to fight what? What the head of the United Nations calls global boiling? Well, according to the Daily Skeptic, the rate of global greening caused by recent increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide has accelerated during the last 2 decades, according to new important findings recently published by a group of Chinese scientists. About 55% of global landmass revealed an accelerated rate of vegetation growth, compared with only 7.3% showing increased decline or browning. We are truly living in insane times. But here's the best bit. This is so great. I just had to share this with you. This week, Mount Isa was cut off due to heavy rains caused by the recent cyclone up in Queensland. It suffered, in other words, a major Tim Flannery rain event, which of course nobody predicted, except people who know what's going on. But watch the following clip, which says everything you need to know about woke idiot corporations like Woolworths and the cult of sustainable, eco-friendly, fake meat food products. So have a listen. This guy went out, so the shelves, he went to his local Woolies, he wandered around his local Woolies, and because of the heavy rains, the Tim Flannery stuff that's fallen, the bomb didn't predict it all, but anyway, many of the shelves were empty. So he wandered around, and let's have a look what happened. Okay, so I will get that clip for you. I'm sorry, we've got a technical problem, but it's a great clip. I'll try and play it for you later in the show. Now, we've been talking about what happened with those protests in Israel. Oh, we've got it now. Don't you just love it? Here we go. Have a listen. This guy is a legend. Have a watch.
I'll show you something funny when an outback town gets isolated. This is the fruit and veg and frozen food department at Woolies, Mount Isa, because we're currently isolated at present. This is the meat department. Okay, just wait for it. This is in the frozen food department. It just gets better, just wait for it. And this is the pet food area. Wait for this though. Plant-based alternatives is chockers full.
So Woolies don't stock any Australia Day paraphernalia because it doesn't sell, but they try and cram woke, garbage, plant-based, eco-environmental, climate change food down our throats, and no one touches it, even when all the shelves are empty. What a legend that guy is. Mate, you can come on this show on Outsiders any time you like. So we were talking about the resurgence of anti-Semitism following the October 7 attacks on Israel by Hamas, which has prompted an uprising fighting the vile left-wing attacks against the Jews in Israel that we continue to see worldwide. Dubbed Never Again Is Now, a series of rallies in support of the Jewish community are set to be held across Australia. Tell us all about it is Director of the Centre for Youth Policy, Freya Leach. Freya, thanks for coming here on Outsiders. Great
Thanks
to have
for having
you here.
me.
Our pleasure. Now, listen, before we get on to the Never Again rally, which is very important people go to, it's 2 weeks today, you were actually at the town hall the same night as those protests at the Opera House, gas the Jews, where's the Jews, F the Jews, kill the Jews. What did you hear up at town hall?
Up at town hall, I heard a group of young men yelling, kill the Jews and F the Jews. My father, Mark Leach, was also there. He's an Anglican minister. And that's what prompted him to get out an Israeli flag and start waving it on the steps of the cathedral in his clerical shirt. A member of the protest then chased him, basically mobbed him. And one of them, we caught them on video, actually did this across his throat, threatening to slit his throat. And he was then chased up onto George Street and had to hide behind a police van. So while I wasn't quite,
Any arrests?
No, nothing.
So the man who threatened...
My father took it to the police. They investigated it, but they said that there wasn't enough to actually convict him or prosecute him of...
So we've had various stat decks of people saying they heard gas the Jews at the Opera House. You heard kill the Jews. You heard F the Jews. Someone went to your father holding an Israeli flag that they would slash his throat. Would you say that according to... what's the bloke's name again? The hard of hearing bloke at the New South Wales Deputy Commissioner, Mal Lanning. Would you say it was a friendly mob that was there? How would you have felt? Were you Jewish in that particular environment?
I mean, the evidence speaks for itself. It's not how you felt. It was the police's direction to Jews on that day. They said, stay out of the city because we cannot guarantee your safety. This is the police themselves saying this mob is so violent and so dangerous, we can't even guarantee your safety in your city 2 days after the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Now, you've seen, sorry, James, Freya, you've seen that 47-minute footage that the Israeli government released, and this is Hamas's own footage of their own butchery. You showed your response on... We saw you on Instagram just after you'd seen it, and it was very moving. You were clearly traumatised. We won't ask you to go through that trauma again, but just tell us about what you saw.
I've never seen anything like it. It brings me to tears just thinking about it and recalling what I saw. This is a terrorist group that is sadistic. It is beyond evil. They managed to kill 1,200 innocent people in all different ways, burning families alive in their home, raping women, beheading people, parading their heads through the streets. You can't even make this stuff up. That is how horrific it is. And there are still hostages that are being held in Gaza. Now it's 120 days.
And Freya, let's be really clear then. That rally that you attended or you saw or were witness to at Town Hall, this was within 24, 48 hours of this occurring. This was in celebration of what those massacres you saw in Gaza, and you saw the video, which Hamas very politely took footage of their own butchery so that it would be there for the world to see. There's no denying that. What was talk us through the mood, what you sort of saw, what was the vibe? Was it jubilant? Was it celebratory? Was it aggressive? Was it angry? What were the things that you saw, and who were the sorts of people who were leading this?
That rally on October 9th was celebrating, glorifying and justifying terrorism. That is what it was. They were celebrating on the steps of the Opera House when I was there in a very positive tone, happy at the resistance of the Palestinian people. We saw tweets. So I'm a student at Sydney University. The president of the NTEU, Nick Reamer, promoted the rally and said he has unconditional solidarity with the Gazan people on October 7. He was there when they were chanting "Gas the Jews." This rally was just despicable.
And so what I wanted to drill down into is this idea that, for the left, they hook on to this because they've adopted this sort of colonial decolonizer mindset. So any sort of psychosis can be excused under the excuse that, oh, well, it's resistance, it's legitimate, it's decolonizer.
Correct. Resistance is justified. That is the classic line. But rape is not resistance. Burning people alive is not resistance. Killing babies in their cots is not resistance. And I am terrified that we are at a point in Australia where people can take to the streets and openly celebrate it as resistance.
Rita?
And we've seen these rallies across Australian cities since then. Every weekend there was people in Melbourne chanting for Intifada at Flinders Street Station. Do you think this activism is largely born of ignorance? Do they even know what Intifada really represents? Or do they understand it and they still support it, which is even a scarier thought?
I pray that they do not actually know what they're chanting. Because if they did, they would be knowingly chanting for the genocide of Jewish people. From the river to the sea, that is a call for genocide. Intifada, that is a call for an uprising, a killing of innocent people. I pray they do not know what they're chanting, but I fear there are enough people organising these rallies that know exactly what is being chanted, but they are using the ignorant mob of social justice warriors that sip their soy lattes in Newtown to create this mass movement calling for genocide, and half of them probably don't even know what it is that they're chanting.
So do those images that you saw haunt you? Do you dream in nightmares or anything like that?
It's terrible. Like, it is... I'm shaking now, remembering what we saw. Images you cannot even explain without bursting into tears. And the worst part is when I posted my reaction on Instagram, I had people commenting, crocodile tears, this is all made up, this didn't happen. Okay. And these people have been fooled. Hamas wants them to know it happened. They were the ones that filmed it. In the video, you can actually hear them saying, come over here, film this. They were posing. There were stunts. They said, make sure you send this back to the head office. You could hear people on their radio saying, send me the footage now, because they wanted to publicise it. But Australians must be so stupid if they think that this didn't happen. Hamas wants you to know it happened. That's why they filmed it.
Now, let's talk about what we wanted to publicise for people. February 18th, so 2 weeks today, Never Again rally, which you're involved with. Tell us what it stands for, what it means and why it's so important. Correct.
This is a movement led by Christians and ordinary Australians to stand up and oppose the 738% increase in anti-Jewish hate that we've seen since October 7 and stand for our Judeo-Christian values of tolerance, love and cohesion. That is what we are doing.
And the event, where is it and what?
It's going to be held in an iconic Sydney location. You'll have to register at the Humanitics link, but you can find more at neveragainisnow.com.au, February 18th, 3 p.m. in Sydney.
Okay, and Never Again is, of course, the phrase that was used after the Holocaust. The world, the entire world, committed to never again will we allow a Holocaust to happen. thank goodness you are putting on this demonstration and asking people to be involved, because we must show that never again means never again, and never again is now, and people have to stand up and say, we really support this, because no, never again must this be allowed to happen.
And let's hope New South Wales Police adequately protect these protesters, because we have seen in the past the counter-protest, and they can come there with very bad intentions.
Hear, hear. So let's thank you, Freya Leach, so much for coming on, and we'll speak to you again. Thank you very much. Thanks. Coming up in a tick, lots more to talk about, including the clown show. Yes, happening in a tick.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders. I'm James Morrow here, as always, with Rowan Dean and Rita Panahy. Well, buckle up, kids, because we're going on a trip to hell, which, as everyone knows, is paved with good intentions. All right, not hell exactly, but New York City, which has become increasingly indistinguishable from old Hades Town ever since Mayor Eric Adams decided it would be a sanctuary city. You see, the Big Apple, and indeed the world, thought things couldn't get any worse after a gang of illegal migrants bashed cops in Times Square earlier this week. Several of them, it would later be revealed, started committing serious crimes from almost the moment they crossed into the United States, quote, seeking a better life, as they say. And then, of course, it all wound up as you see there on your screen. But, of course, there's always new and deeper circles of torment to explore in a liberal utopia. So, of course, things actually, after that footage you saw there, got a lot worse. You see, the cops arrested several of the assailants, and then, guess what? Because compassion or something, let them out on bail. That's right, let them go out on go free. Now, have a look at these scamps and scallywags after they were released by the court.
I don't speak English. Is that how you respect this country? I don't speak English. I don't speak English.
You speak English? No English? Espanol.
Just into Fox News now, NYPD making 2 more arrests, illegal immigrants. And that attack on officers. Those suspects also allegedly stole an officer's cell phone. Well, that'll help them track you down.
Well, charming, but authorities also believe that at least 4 of those arrested and let free without bail hopped on a bus for California, another jurisdiction where it seems that laws are for suckers. Now, this is exactly where #welcome leads, of course. While New York State Governor Kathy Hochul has suggested, quite rightly, the criminals should be kicked out of the country, imagine that, Mayor Eric Adams continues down the road to perdition. Even as the city struggles to pay its bills, he is rolling out a program to give illegal migrants at least $53 million worth of prepaid credit cards to help them buy supplies. Oh, isn't that lovely? And as for Big Apple District Attorney Alvin Bragg, well, here he is being confronted as to why his office let the attackers free.
Why were they released? Why were those first migrants released?
Well, of course he had nothing to say about it. He's been too busy trying to prosecute Donald Trump. I mean, everybody knows that he's the real criminal here. Meanwhile, in Congress, things are not much better, at least on the Democrat side, where Democrats voted against a bill that ultimately passed that would make it possible, imagine that, to deport a migrant for DUI. Why should mowing down a family while plastered be a barrier to a better life, after all, right? Seriously. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the media's role in all of this. You're going to love this. Check out the reaction of these CNN hosts when their resident law enforcement expert explains to them the reality that when migrants go someplace where the law is not enforced, They go there to deliberately commit crimes. The looks on their faces here is priceless. Wait for it.
This particular crew operated on mopeds and scooters. They were doing organized retail theft. They were doing snatches on the street, iPhones, iPads, clothing, so on and so forth. One of them that they are still seeking has 10 charges on one day because he's part of a pattern that's been going on. What the detectives are telling me is they have crews here that operate in New York, do all their stealing, then go to Florida to spend the money and then come back. And I'm like, well, why don't they just stay and steal in Florida? And they said, because there you go to jail.
Oh. Wow. Great reporting. Keep us posted on this.
Oh, great point. Yeah, well, indeed. This is, of course, the end point of a woolly-headed multicultural liberalism, of course, where letting anyone, including criminals and terrorists and a suspicious number of single military-aged males from countries that are not exactly your friends, come in because, well, borders are racist, they say, and those three letters, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are your holy trinity. This immigration issue is shaping up to be a big issue in the U.S. presidential election coming up. So might I suggest the Republicans perhaps come up with a DEI-based slogan of their own? Deport every illegal. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?
That's fantastic, James D. I love it. That's great. Now to the US. Some strange goings on. Regular viewers of Outsiders will know John Hinderaker, a great friend of this show, who runs the Centre for the American Experiment and the brilliant Powerline blog. Well, John's office and other offices nearby, housing various conservative organisations, were this weekend, unbelievably, firebombed. John joins us now. John, great to see you. Sorry about these circumstances. I'm glad to see they didn't firebomb any of your books behind you, but tell us what happened. This is a serious problem.
Rowan, it's very serious. It happened a week ago, last weekend, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Some people, it may have just been one person, more likely two or three, broke into a building that houses my organization. We've got 22 people in that office. It's only 3 stories high, but it's a good-sized building. There's a lot of small businesses in it, many tenants. But it includes 3 conservative organizations. And what these people did is they broke in and they targeted these 3 conservative organizations. There's something called the Upper Midwest Law Center, which is an organization that I helped to found, and I serve on the board of directors. It's a conservative public interest law firm, and they broke the door down there, broke in, set that on fire, I think using gasoline as an accelerant. And then they came down to the first floor, which is where my office is, and across the hall from our office is something called Take Charge, which is a Black-run organization that messages primarily to young Black people. And so what you see there is the corridor between our organization and Take Charge. We actually leased that space to Take Charge. It's all our space. So they lit that fire in the corridor and then they fled. Well, it was unbelievably destructive. But fortunately, somebody called the fire department. They came, they put out the fires, 2 totally distinct fires, one on the first floor, another fire on the 3rd floor. So obviously arson. There was never any question about that.
And what are the police doing about it?
Well, I'm working closely with the FBI. The FBI was called in right away because it was obviously arson. It was obviously ideologically based. They targeted conservative organizations. And so we're hoping to be able to catch the perpetrators. There are a lot of suspects. It could be eco-terrorists. It could be Antifa types. It could be a public sector union that we have been adverse to. There are a number of possibilities.
Scary times. John, tell us about the US airstrikes overnight. So Biden finally got round to retaliating for the 3 deaths of American soldiers. Ronald Reagan would have been a bit swifter, I imagine, as would Donald Trump, I imagine. But tell us your reaction to the US strikes and what it means going forward.
Well, I think the key point here, Rowan, is that since last October, there have been 170 attacks by Iranian proxies on American personnel and American assets in the Middle East. It took 170 attacks, culminating in the deaths of these 3 military personnel and wounding of 40 other American military personnel. And finally, after giving days of warning, the Biden administration responded with 85 airstrikes. And I hope they did some damage. The casualties being claimed by the other side are kind of amazingly low. So I hope they actually struck some significant targets. And part of what's going on here, Rowan, is that all along here since October, the mantra of the Biden administration, whenever we're attacked, has been, we don't want a wider war. We don't want a wider war. That is wider than the war between Israel and Hamas. Well, the problem is that if you come across as being weak, you increase the risk of a wider war. And I think that may be what we're...
Rita.
John, I've just returned from the US, and I would have thought, given what prices are doing there, the cost of living crisis would be the number one issue in this coming election. But it is what James was talking about, illegal immigration, Biden administration setting record after record. What's going to be the resolution there? Is there going to be a last-minute executive order to do something meaningful about this, or are we going to go to the election with this at crisis point?
Well, Rita, the Democrats are doing what they've done before. They realize this is a terrible, terrible political issue for them. Americans are up in arms about the millions of illegals streaming across the southern border, and Biden has deliberately opened that border. There's no question about it. So what they're trying to do now is to sucker Republicans in Congress into voting for some kind of a compromise bill that will have the effect. No one's seen the text yet, by the way. No one knows what's actually in this bill. But you can predict that what it's going to do is legalize large numbers of illegal immigrants, exchange for which Joe Biden will belatedly take a few half-hearted measures to try to stem the tide. And that their goal there is to turn the fiasco of the southern border into a bipartisan problem, dragging Republicans on board. I hope they don't fall for it.
James.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting how this is capturing everybody's attention here. And some of the text I've heard about that bill suggests that when the number of illegal crossings gets too high, they can shut down the border, which begs the question why they don't shut it down to begin with. But John, Elon Musk earlier today tweeted that basically what's going on here is they want to let as many illegals into the country as they can, with the idea of eventually granting them citizenship through amnesty and creating a whole new tranche of Democrat voters forever. Are people starting to wake up to this being the eventual con that's going on by the left in terms of pumping up the population for their side, and then giving them an amnesty?
Well, the people I know are catching on to it, James. I think an important point to make is that all this wailing about how Joe Biden somehow doesn't have the power to stop this is ridiculous. Donald Trump stopped it, and Joe Biden reversed those policies. Under existing law, the President of the United States has plenary authority to stop immigration of any category if he determines that it is in the best interests of the United States to stop that immigration. Joe Biden can do anything he wants to seal that southern border. He just doesn't want to do it. And I think many, many people have figured that out.
John Heinderegger, always great to chat to you. Sorry to hear about your office. I hope the police get on top of that. I'm sure if the local police here got involved, they'd be still asking, what was the... Anyway, that's another story, an in-joke, John. Thanks so much, John. We'll speak to you soon. Thanks so much. Coming up, Canberra Clown Show and lots more here on Outsiders. Don't go away. Roll up, step right this way to the Canberra Clown Show, where this week, tragically, much-loved vacuum retailers Godfrey's was forced to the wall, blaming a challenging economic environment thanks to cost of living pressures and higher operating costs, among other factors. The truth, of course, being that Godfrey's, which has been part of the Aussie main drag for nearly 100 years, during which it managed to survive the Depression, the Second World War, 1970s stagflation, multiple recessions, the GFC and COVID, simply couldn't survive under the economic conditions inflicted on us by this clown, Jimbo the inflatable ventriloquist, whose expertise is speaking out of both sides of his mouth at the same time. Jimbo told us this week, as inflation dipped ever so slightly, that his plan is working.
My plan is working.
Sorry, that was another popular ventriloquist with his dummy, with an equally ridiculous economic plan, no doubt, as Jimbo's. Jimbo, who can tell porkies even when his lips aren't moving, proclaimed this week that inflation must decrease further and even faster out of one side of his mouth, but weirdly, out of the other side of his mouth, he proudly announced a change in the mix of important tax cuts, which will, of course, along with all of Labor's other big spending, climate-obsessed policies, simply push up inflation, pushing it up and up with one hand and trying to talk it down with the other. Good luck with that sleight of hand or balancing act. According to Peter Van Onselen from the Oz, the newspaper, not the circus, Jimbo's other policies may well include a future attack on negative gearing, as well as potentially attacks on the family home, if Labor get their way. Says Peter, quote, Jim Chalmers all but confirmed on Monday that Labor will make changes to negative gearing when he categorically ruled out doing so. That's what his word is worth these days. Peter goes on, quote, however much Labor wants to cast its broken promise on tax as a virtuous backflip, it lampoons the truthfulness of other pledges it now makes. So is Peter Van Onselen correct? Will Jimbo move on negative gearing? Well, why not ask Jimbo himself before he became Treasurer?
But any housing policy that doesn't deal with negative gearing and capital gains tax is a sham. Housing affordability, which doesn't make important and considered changes to capital gains and negative gearing, has a hole in the middle of it. If you want to deal with housing affordability, you need to start with negative gearing and capital gains.
Well, we clearly heard that particular ventriloquist message. Thank you, Jimbo. As Michael Kroger said here on Sky, yes, Anthony Albanese and his government are bold-faced liars. As Van Onselen concludes, quote, now anything Labor promises to do or not do simply cannot be trusted. When Labor makes promises ahead of the next election, how can it expect to be believed? Look out, folks, you have been warned. Oh, and did I mention Labor's new 10% biosecurity protection levy for farmers that kicks in on the 1st of July? Yep. Yet another brand new tax on Australian producers of agriculture, forestry and fishery products. An increase that will, according to the grain producers of Australia, simply drive up grocery prices and add even more onto the already high cost of living and weekly grocery bills for all Australians. Nice work, Jimbo. Indeed, according to Paul Kelly in the Oz, quote, working class people are destined to be throttled on higher personal income taxes many years into the future. The real economic and political secret in Labor's tax policy backflip. A smaller proportion of the population is going to be paying a larger proportion of the tax revenue. That means you and your kids. Judo Bank Chief Economic Advisor Warren Hogan warns this government has basically spent its first 18 months in office blaming the Reserve Bank for all the misery out there when it is actually income tax that has gone up more. Bracket creep has had a bigger impact on middle-income Australia than the RBA's interest rate rise. Greg Sheridan bleakly compared Australia under the Albanese government to Argentina under the Peronistas and the Perón government of Evita fame. Quote, Argentina, like Australia, has a small, well-educated population and a big territory with agricultural and mineral riches. Under one Perón, it developed stylized and ideological politics, featuring ever-growing transfer payments, crippling budget deficits, pro-trade union industrial relations, well, we've just seen that on our own waterfront, second-rate nationalism and creeping authoritarianism. Its governments and people assumed there would always be money to spend. Sound familiar, folks? The political system became toxic, writes Greg, and abusive. The only thing that people believed from government was cash, more cash in hand. And Greg concludes, it's the path to political ruin, and that's the path that we are seemingly on. Perhaps it's time Andrew Lloyd Webber released a musical based around a motley group of clowns running a circus in Canberra. Don't lie to me, Albanese. Those stage 3 tax cuts, you broke your promise.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
You're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. And thank you so much for watching us every Sunday morning. We certainly do appreciate it. And of course, you must always watch on Fridays, the US Report with James Morrow and the Rita Panahi Show. And so I don't forget later on, this evening, a new show, The Jury with Danica DeGiorgia here on Sky. So you've got to watch that this evening at 8 p.m. Be lots of fun. Now, Rita has some breaking news for us, Rita.
Well, I don't know if it's breaking, but there is further speculation talk, as reported by the Carroll Sun, leadership speculation in the Victorian Liberal Party.
Victorian Libs.
Our good friend John Prosciutto is still struggling, and I think that might explain why finally last week they walked away from their treaty position.
What? 6 months late?
6 months, try 2 years, 3 years late. They had their completely incoherent position once they saw the polls of saying, we're not backing the voice, we're against the voice. It took them a good, 12 months to come to that position, but we want a treaty. It was absolutely insane, and finally they've walked away. But is it going to be enough to save him? He's going to be going to court in September with that defamation trial with Moira Deeming. His lawyers have hit back at Moira this week. So
here's a simple one. Solve two birds with one stone, folks. Make Moira the leader of the Libs in Victoria. And well, who's standing? I mean, I haven't heard of any. Who's standing up against John Prosciutto?
Well,
Fred Salami? Annabelle Artichoke. I mean, who else have they got in that rich deli of talent down there?
There is an important point. There's an important point here, which I think we should make about state governments across the country here for Liberal governments, coalition oppositions. We see this in New South Wales here, where Chris Minns has been very artfully staying to the right of the opposition, which is supposed to be conservative on a whole range of issues. And we're going to see the same thing play out again in Victoria. If you're going to be a centre-right conservative party, you've actually got to own the ideology, own the principles, own what you're all about, what you're supposedly offering people as a point of difference. Otherwise, you will wind up getting absolutely steamrolled.
Rowan, can we perhaps, send Chris Minns down to be the Victorian Liberal leader? Victoria could do it.
Well, at least it'd be a jump to the right. It'll be a jump in the right direction, exactly.
Anybody.
Now, let's have some hyperbole. How is that for timing? You can't do that at home, can you? No. Hyperbole is hyperbole. It's Julia Gillard's pronunciation of extreme exaggeration. So hyperbole, we look at it every week. Extreme exaggeration. We've got a great one this week. We've got reverse hyperbole. We've got a scientist, a climate change scientist at the University of Oxford, who has come out after having spent years and years saying we're all doomed, it's all a disaster. She's come out and she said, actually, no, it's not. It's not. She's saying we're fine, we'll be fine. She's looked at all the data and go, actually, there's nothing to worry about.
Well, thank God for a bit of self-reflection. After all these doomsday predictions, how many of these scientists who make these predictions that never eventuate, never even come close to eventuating, don't take a minute and say, maybe I should
look at the data again.
Aspects
exactly.
of this.
Because you do have to figure that. I mean, you see this throughout really academia, and in fact a lot of the political world too, because there's so much money flying around on this topic and a lot of other topics, it really just becomes a grift. So it becomes a contest to see who can get the most popularity around, just
and
revving up the fear, revving up the doom scrolling, revving up the terror. And, with that comes funding and grants and approbation and jobs and things like that. And so, of course, it just becomes, it's not academics, it's a grift. And that's where
And the worse they go, the more extreme they are with these alarmist exaggerations. There aren't many sensible people out there, including all the viewers of this show, who sit there and go, no, that doesn't make sense. That can't be right.
And this is what happens to, Peter Rittergray, friend of this program here. He's somebody who is a real academic and a student of science and the environment. He cares deeply about the environment, but, says things the other way and he gets in trouble for it.
And that's possibly why there's not more self-reflection, because if you do come out and say something
they do a read
different,
on you.
you will be absolutely...
But I think that maybe that's, let's be optimistic and hope that
Can I nominate a hyperbole,
yes,
the
please.
ABC series?
Okay.
I don't know if you've watched any of it. I've tried to avoid it. But what I did read and listen to was Peter Credlin's response, which I thought was very powerful
Nemesis. Yes, I did watch it.
And the inspiration for hyperbole, Julia Gillard, got just a small mention in that as well, because this series, why would any Conservative take part in this? Just
very few did. I looked hard amongst the libs on offer. There were very few Conservatives there.
What's Scott Morrison doing talking to these people for 3 hours? But what was interesting was sometimes when you give people enough rope, sometimes if you just let them speak without challenging some of the absurd things they're saying, they come out looking like absolute clowns. And I would suggest quite a few former Liberal MPs in that series have come out looking like absolute clowns, according to the clips I have seen.
Yeah, no, I watched the whole thing, and Tony Abbott did, and Peter did the right thing, being not involved. It was all people you'd never heard of. Wyatt Earp, or whatever his name is, that bloke. Craig Laundrie, what's his name? A bunch of people you've never heard of again, and they're the ones who all supported Turnbull, which is basically all you needed to know. Lots more happening next week. We've got so many things we could still do, but that's all for this week. But I want to plug again. I know we've got another minute up our sleeve. That's good.
We should mention the great victory with Rip Curl, because Rip Curl have backtracked dramatically after wading into trans activism and appointing a male body identifying as female as an ambassador, using them in an ad. They've actually issued an apology now. Not only have they wiped all evidence of this, but they are backtracking, they're apologising. It remains to be seen if they can repair the damage they've done to their brand.
Well, this is so important. We've been saying this for a while now, but it's the Bud Light theory. It's up to Conservatives and common sense people to make their feelings known on these issues. So tell Rip Curl that you were appalled, because the more we say this and the more people learn that there is a price to this woke virtue signalling, it's not cost-free, which they always thought it was, the better for all of us. How's this? White people are a parasitic, barbaric, deviant, murderous, genocidal and thieving race. That's a bit of hyperbole from a BBC employee in London. She still has her job. There you go. Don't forget to watch The Jury tonight at 8 o'clock, and we will see you next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Thank you.